Welcome to this episode of Out of the Best Books, the podcast where we deep dive into classic literature and have conversations about what we've learned and discovered along the way. We love all things books and reading, and we want to share our love of the classics with you. We hope to inspire you to read along with us and join in the conversation. I'm Amity.
And I'm Laura. Now let's get talking about the classics.
So I feel like both chapter 10 and chapter 11, they're giving us a deeper dive into old Dan and little Anne's personalities. Did you kind of get that vibe? Really sketching their character a little more. Because chapter 10, it talks all about old Dan and how extremely strong-willed he is, and he just goes for it, like without thinking all the time, and he ends up often getting in trouble. And there's one time he basically is up in a tree, and Billy pretty much, he has to go and pull him down.
Up in the hollow log, right?
Yeah.
And he gets him down and he just goes right back up.
Yeah. Yeah. Because he's just
he's impulsive.
Very impulsive. That's the word I was looking for. Exactly. Super strong, an amazing hunter, very impulsive.
And little Anne is smart.
Yeah.
And little.
Yeah. And I don't know, is there anything else that you wanted to say about chapter 10? I felt like that one there wasn't even very much that I underlined in that one.
The dogs follow. I like that the dogs follow him to the store. Like he tries to trick them or get away without them, and they won't have it. They're like, "We're coming with you." And then the coon hunters tease him at the store.
What did they tease him about?
That those dogs are so little, they couldn't possibly catch. They couldn't be good hunters.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And then this is the chapter where old Dan falls into the muskrat den.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he thinks he does things before he thinks about it.
Mm-hmm.
So he gets himself into trouble. Where little Anne is she thinks about everything she does. And isn't she way less quick to ball treed? That's what he would say.
Yeah. It's like she wants to make certain first.
Yeah. And Dan's like, I got him. We're good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then also that Dan won't hunt without Anne. I think that happens in this chapter too.
Yes, they do discover that one will not go without the other. They're completely inseparable, because that was the thing. He tried to take Dan without her, and just to give her a rest, like she had hurt her foot.
Yeah.
Or something. And he wouldn't go without her.
He just goes back home.
Yeah. It's like, well, you go have fun.
Yeah, so that chapter, and then 11 also is they're hunting in the snow. Little Anne falls in the river.
Yeah, and that one was really powerful. I love how whenever, almost the first thing that he does whenever he has any sort of a problem is he prays. Again, he's just this young teenage boy, but that's his first, what am I going to do about this? I'm going to pray. And then he goes to work, because again, he's so competent. There's so many things that he can just do and figure out. He's a super smart kid. But he always goes to God first. And then, little Anne, he pretty much thinks that she's a goner, that she's going to fall into the frozen river and be gone. He almost leaves with Dan because he's like, I can't rescue her, but I can't stand to watch her go in there into the river and die. So they almost leave. And then it's like he just gets this stroke of inspiration. I think he would call it revelation from God for how he can save her. And he just about kills himself in the process, just about freezes to death trying to get her, but he's able to rescue her.
I think every time too, he has this experience with, when he's cutting down the tree, and then he goes home and he asks his parents, Have you ever seen this happen where the wind will just like hit one tree? And he's like, and it, like that happens maybe right after he prayed or
Yes.
whatever. And his parents are just like, well, there's got to be another explanation. Like that tree was so tall that's why the wind just hit that one or whatever. But I just think it's funny that he's always trying to put together why this happened and attribute it to God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in this case, there was like the creaking of his lantern, like it was like the handle fell down or something. And just that sound made him think of what he needed to do to save her. And then he goes home later and he says, I've never seen that handle ever fall again.
Yeah.
and um and then there's this part in that chapter where he says, before I left for home, I walked back to the sycamore tree. Once again, I said a prayer, but this time the words were different. I didn't ask for a miracle. In every way a young boy could, I said, thanks. My second prayer wasn't said with just words. All of my heart and soul was in it. And I love that. What an incredible example of just, he asked, and then he took the time to be grateful.
Yeah, they don't ever talk about like the family's religion or anything, nothing like that. Just his like experience with prayer. And I think that was kind of interesting. Like, I wonder if that was just him.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that his parents are very faithful, especially later on. We really get an insight to sort of their hearts and their thoughts where God is concerned. But they're not very demonstrative earlier on. So
yeah, he's just such a kid, such a great kid.
Yeah.
Well, 12 and 13. Yes, this is where the Pritchard boys come in.
Yeah. Yeah. So Rainey and Reuben, they meet up. And obviously Billy knows them, but I get the idea that he pretty much avoids them. When there's not very many other kids around, they're pretty much the only kids around his age, but he chooses not to be friends with them for a reason, right?
Yeah.
And because they're jerks. And he says they're always betting. They're always dirty. They're always breaking the rules. They walk into grandpa's store and they pretend to be buying tobacco for their dad. And then they just throw it in their own mouths, whatever. And they try to make a bet with Billy. And it all centers around this ghost coon who they say nobody can catch. And grandpa takes the bet. He's like,
grandpa's like,
Yeah. And that's so funny. Like his pride totally takes over there because he's letting these just punk kids really affect him.
I don't think Billy's that into it.
No, I don't think so at all. Like he does it for his grandpa, really.
Yeah, and like even in the middle of it, he's like, I'm just gonna take my dogs and go home.
Yeah.
This just isn't worth it, or
Yeah.
And so they bet him $2, right? That he can't go get the ghost coon. And his dog, well, Dan has trouble with other dogs.
Yes.
So he's like, you can't bring your dog. Like,
yes.
Yeah. So they're out there trying to get this ghost coon. And Reuben and Rainey's dog gets loose, right? And comes running out. And then there's a big fight.
Yes. Yes. And the competitive side of me does have to add that they did tree the ghost coon. They did the thing that these kids say that could never be done. And so they did figure, like, it was pretty much little Ann, it was her brains that figured out what this ghost coon was doing. And so they tree the ghost coon. And that's when Billy's like, hey, we're done. Like, they did it. Let's go. And they don't really want to be done. But then their dog comes along and attacks Dan. Yeah. And then little Ann gets in the mix, right? And they can see that they're beating their dog, this blue tick hound.
That Reuben and Rainey are like, they're gonna kill him. They're gonna kill him, And so, and also when he says, I treed the coon, Reuben and Rainey are like, oh no, you got to kill it. Yeah. And he says, that's like, not what I said. Like,
right.
that was the whole deal. So he gives him the $2 at that point. And then the dog comes out and they get in this fight. And it's just Reuben that starts like running to get in the middle of it, maybe to stop
Well,
them.
he says he's going to kill Billy's dog. So he grabs Billy's axe,
Yes.
which must be really, really sharp. And he grabs it and he's going after Billy's dogs to kill them.
Yeah.
And he falls on it. Yeah. He falls on the axe.
Ugh.
And it buries inside him anyway. Yeah.
Gruesome.
Yeah.
And he's like, and it takes Billy a little while to like get everything under control before he even realizes what's happened.
Yeah.
And Rainey is standing there. I think he knows, and he's just can't move, can't do anything. Right.
Yeah.
And then, he says to Billy, take it out of me. I'm like, this is just,
oh my gosh. Yeah.
Heartbreaking, right?
It really is. And especially when you consider just, well, it would be horrible for anybody, but just these young kids
out in the middle of the woods with like
out in the middle of the woods. Yeah.
Nothing. Yeah. So they deal, I mean, I think he does take it out, and then he kind of dies immediately.
Yeah.
And so then he has to go find somebody to help him. And do you remember where Reuben's the one that died, where Rainey goes? Does he just stay there or does he leave?
So I was just looking, I think he runs off probably towards home.
Yeah.
Because, Billy takes the axe out and then he's trying to figure out what to do. So he calls for Rainey. Rainey's not there. So he's just kind of frozen a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think it's interesting that he plugs in right here. He says, a cold chill ran over my body. I suppose it is natural at a time like that for a boy to think of his mother. I thought of mine. I wanted to get home. Like when he was so traumatized in the very darkest moment that he probably had in his life so far. He just wanted his mom.
Yeah.
That's really sweet.
They go get Grandpa and some other people to come help them with the body, and they take it back. And the family says they have their own cemeteries, like, we'll just bury him. Yeah. We'll take care of it all. Oh, and then he says to his mom, I need a gun because the axe is too dangerous to be carrying. She says, no gun, not until you're 21.
No, that's not happening.
Yeah. And then the end of that chapter where he goes to pay respects to Reuben is just like, this to me shows what kind of character he has. Like, this is an amazing kid, right? And nobody sees him do it. Like, he's hiding. He puts flowers on the grave. He sees the mom. He's hiding, but the mom doesn't see him, but she goes out to the grave because she hears something, I think. She goes out there, and then he sees her crying as she walks back to the house. Oh, it's just, what a kid, though. Like,
yeah. Well, he said that he felt much better after paying his respects to Reuben. Everything looked brighter, and I didn't have that funny feeling anymore. And the funny feeling was probably like needing some closure. Like, what an incredibly traumatic event for a young kid to watch a peer die in such an awful and painful way, and to be involved at all. Like, obviously no part of it was his fault, but he was right there, and it was his axe, and the trauma of that would just be really severe. But
yeah, he talks later about, like, every time he sees the axe, he's like, I didn't really, like, it bothered me every time, he'd look at it and think of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Then the big, it's coming up here. Like, we're getting to the climax of the book, right? So, Grandpa enters Billy into the coon championship without telling him.
Yeah. So he enters him in this huge coon hunt competition. To me, it sounds like it's something that happens every year, and people come from all over the hills, from all the surrounding states. It's just the best coon hounds from all around. So it's a big deal. And they decide they can go. And I love that they convince Papa to go too. Because Grandpa's like, you should ask your dad to go, you know? And he's like, well, I guess. So, but everybody's really supportive of it. And Mama is really supportive. She's like, the girls and I can take care of things and you guys go do this. So
I like,
I love that.
I wrote down that everybody in this family believes in these dogs.
I know.
Like, they're like, no, they're the best hunting dogs, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, of course, you're going to go and win. Another interesting thing I noticed was the foreshadowing in chapter 1, talking about the cups. So like, if you're paying attention, you know that he's going to win the competition, right? I oftentimes when I'm reading a book, like I don't notice that in the beginning, like I miss a lot in the beginning. And then once you get to the end, you're like, oh yeah.
Oh, there it was.
Especially if you go back and read it again.
I know. And I guess that really is, it's so hard because there's so many amazing books. So it's like, who has time to read one twice? Right. But if you're going to get everything that you can out of it, you almost have to.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I'll just go back and read the beginning again. Like,
sure. Oh, that's a
just think, oh yeah, there was stuff I missed in here that, you know, and because I feel like in the beginning of a book, you're like trying to get your grounding.
Yeah.
Like trying to figure stuff out. Yeah. I thought that was interesting. Okay. And this is the part where they're getting ready to leave. Oh, well, he figures out that his mom is expecting.
Yes.
He's like,
yeah, you love that.
Like nobody mentioned it.
I know. He's like, I just noticed that her
belly is swelling.
getting bigger. Yeah. Yeah. I'm like, okay, so did she never have morning sickness or what? Like she just could fully function and never mentioned these things. Because
and he makes sure
that's cool.
He makes sure that everything, like she has everything she needs before they leave. Like he makes sure she has enough wood and you know, Papa and him take care of them. But yeah, as they're leaving, I just love the exchange between the grandma and grandpa. Like she says to him, I knew you'd forget something. Well, first he has Billy hide the jug, which is probably alcohol, right?
Yeah.
And he says to him, did you hide the jug good? And then grandma comes out and she's like, she hands him a scarf and says, I knew you'd forget something. And then he says, Nanny, we've got everything. You must think I'm a baby and don't know how to pack a grub box. This just reminds me kind of my parents, right? A baby, grandma snorted. Why, you're worse than a baby. At least they have a little sense. You don't have any at all. An old codger like you out chasing a coon all over the hills. This must just come after like years and years and years of marriage, right?
Absolutely. Like that's the thing, you know, that her patience has been tried. So
yeah, that's it. She just says, I mean, he just gets up, like it doesn't bother him. He just gets up in the buggy and they leave. Like but I thought it was interesting. That's the only time that grandma's mentioned.
Yes. But such a personality that's all we need to kind of get an idea, because she also gives Billy a kiss and there's obviously affection there and she's a nice grandma, but you know, she's got to keep her hubby in line. And the thing is too, like as we go throughout the story, it's like grandpa is this amazing, wonderful grandfather, wonderful man, and has a heart for boys. And he probably is one of those people you could really say is a little boy at heart. And so that can probably get him into a little bit of trouble with his wife every now and again. So
yeah, maybe Billy and him are alike, kind of.
Yeah, that's really probably true. And she's somebody who's gotten exasperated over years.
It totally is like, it just, I guess the typical relationship between older people. I don't know.
Yeah. Funny. So cute. I wanted to back up just one little thing to bring up, because earlier in the chapter, right before it talks about him, you know, making sure everything's good for his mom, there's this line, well, so his littlest sister asks about, you know, the dogs winning the cup. And as you mentioned, they're pretty confident that the dogs are going to win. And so his little sister is like, well, will you give me the cup? she says, "Can I have the gold cup?" And he says, "I smiled as I looked into her clear blue eyes, and I said, 'Honey, if I win it, I'll give it to no one but you.'" And that was just so sweet, because first of all, how many brothers call their little sister honey? And maybe it's just the author, but this is something that actually reminded me of my grandpa, because one of my grandpas, he was just the sweetest, kindest person. And one of the stories that had been passed down is that that's exactly how he would refer to his sisters. He would call them honey. And I just think that's like the sweetest thing. Like, even as a teenage boy, he would say honey to his little sisters. And anyway, he was just this incredibly brilliant and masculine and man's man, but also just so gentle and kind, and called everybody honey and sweetie. So
that's like my my son had a companion that came to visit, and he's from South Carolina, and he was like calling me ma'am and everybody sir, and I was just like, whoa, like I'm not used to this.
Yeah. How do we train that?
I think my mom said, "Oh, he called my dad sir," and my mom said, "You don't need to call him sir."
That's funny.
It was funny just because we don't experience that out here in the Northwest.
No.
Like,
yeah,
very sweet. And they told me that his father makes him call his mom ma'am, and they thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, they're off.
Yeah. Yeah, and the first part of it, they get there, they get settled, and they have a beauty contest for all the hounds, which I think is really funny. But I guess that's kind of a normal thing with animals in general, right? Like, take them to the fair and enter them into basically beauty competitions. And so they do that, and Little Ann wins. So that's where the small cup comes from. She wins a small cup. And then they lay out the competition rules. Basically, it takes place over the course of like 5 nights. So they only have so many groups go each night with their dogs. And so the first night, they sort of set the standard, like however many coons they get, the person who gets the most coons, they stay, and they're going to move on to the next stage. Everybody else goes home. The next night, they have to try to match that number of coons, or else they'll have to go home, type of thing. So, and Billy and Grandpa and Papa, their dogs, and the judge who's going to go with them, they get the 4th night. They talk about that night, but not a ton. It's just, we know that they get the 3 coons, so they're able to move on to the championship round. There's not that many sets of dogs and hunters, but the night is horrible. It's just really stormy and snowy, just kind of the worst situation, because they can't hear each other, they can't hear the dogs, they can't see anything. But Billy's determined to just keep going, because he wants to win this more than anything, and he feels like if he gives up, he lets his dogs down.
And they call it a blizzard. It's bad.
Yeah. yeah, it's bad.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things happen, right? They almost lose, see, what did you write here? They almost lost the dogs. Grandpa falls and sprains his ankle, which they don't know. It's just sprained. They think it could be broken. And he
they think he's dead.
Yeah, well, he passes out, right?
Yeah.
He's just laying on the ground, face down.
Face down, yeah. And again, Billy goes to him and he kneels down and he says a prayer right there. It's like, please don't let my grandpa be dead. And it's just his ankle is twisted. But
that last night is incredible. Like, they get 3 coons at once in one tree, right?
Yes.
They end up getting all 3 of them. Correct.
They do. Yeah. And they had thought they lost the dogs. They tracked them down again. And then the dogs go off again. And then everybody from the camp shows up, because they'd all been searching for Billy and his group for hours, because everybody else had given up and come back, I believe. And so they come back and find him. And this one guy runs up. He's like, there's 2 dogs. They're completely frozen over there. And so Billy, he just breaks down because he thinks that his dogs, he's like, once they tree a coon, they will not move until I get there. So he's like, they very well could be completely frozen. So this guy comes along and says they're frozen. What all he means is that they're covered in snow. They're totally alive, but it gives Billy nearly a heart attack. So
yeah, I think they say like that wasn't a very nice way to say that, because panics.
Everybody gets after him. Yeah. He's determined. And one thing that I wrote down that he said that I really loved, he said, I've been out in storms like this before all by myself. So he's like, I'm not going in just because of the storm. And I've never left my dogs in the woods, and I'm not going to now, even if I have to look for them myself. So again, there's that element of just the most perfect trust. Like no matter what, he's always going to do what he says he's going to do with his dogs. They know they can trust him, and he knows he can trust them. They always know what each other are going to do.
Okay. We're getting to the
worst part.
Yes. The part where like, if you hate this book, this is why.
Yes. I know. And as I read it and then reread it, I'm like sobbing every time. And I'm like, I don't know how I can even talk about this. So
we'll just skip to that. Like, okay, that's it. The dogs die. So like the first time I was reading this time, right? So like a week ago, I was working and I was kind of like reading the print version and listening to it back and forth. And I was like, I had like 40 minutes left of the book, and I work in dental offices, and I was like, I can't take this in and finish
like sobbing right in the middle of the dental office.
Yeah. I was like, I'm gonna have to wait for this for later. And so I think I listened to it on the way home, and I just sobbed.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny because like we have a dog that's getting older, and like when you get a dog, you don't think about them dying.
Yeah.
You just think they're going to be with you forever. And then like a few years down the road, you're like, uh-oh. I've told my husband, we're not getting another dog because I'm not going to, I can't handle this. I can't handle losing them.
Yeah.
So I don't want another one.
Okay, there's that part too. But after a time, they're like this constant in your life. And they're, for a lot of people, they're kind of a member of the family. And so for them to pass, it's devastating.
Yeah.
So, but it's something that you know is going to happen a lot sooner than most things. So
I know, but when you're getting that dog, you don't think about it.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that he, like, you know, our dog just lays around, but these dogs are out like fighting coons, right? They have, I don't know, I guess it's just such a much dangerous life for them. Like, the chances that they could die early, and who even knows how old they are.
Yeah, we don't really get that. That's something that I wondered, and we really don't get that. So we don't know how old Billy is at the end of this, and we don't know how they are. But no matter what, like he's still a teenager, and so there's no way that they're more than like 3 or 4.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking like 5 at the not even that. Because I mean, if he was like 13, he'd be like, I bet you they're not very old. They've got to be.
Yeah, I don't think they are. Yeah. So,
which I don't know. It's just so heartbreaking.
Yeah. So we should give some background though. So, Billy and his dogs, they're on a hunt, and they encounter a mountain lion. And I don't know that it's the same one they encountered before, but I'm pretty sure they call it the demon of the Ozarks. And it's amazing that in all this time of hunting that they really hadn't encountered a mountain lion before. But this one is out for blood, and it attacks. And old Dan, little Ann, they just fight relentlessly. Like they go for the jugular, you know, they latch on and they don't let go. And then there's a point where Billy is trying to save his dog. So he he's like hacking at the mountain lion with his axe. But and so the mountain lion turns on him and it leaps at him. And Billy thinks that he's gone. Like he's like, okay, we're done here. But then all of a sudden, I wish I had the exact quote right in front of me, but all of a sudden he sees his two dogs as one leap in front of him and take down the lion, and they save his life. And as a result, Dan, his wounds are so awful that literally his entrails fall out. And Billy is able to get him home and get little Ann home. And old Dan passes away on the table.
They try. I mean, like I think his mom tries to like stitch him up.
Yeah.
But
yeah, they try so hard. And that's another thing. That was another thing that I was like, his parents are amazing, because instead of being like, oh, there's nothing we can do, like, she's like, I don't know what to do, but we're going to try. And so she like washes his insides and then tries to put them back in and sew him up. And
yeah, I don't think I could do that. I'm just not, my husband could. So that's who would do it.
As long as somebody can.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you wouldn't ever have that situation, so it's fine. But
yeah, but like if something happens, I'm like, blood. No. Yeah. Oh, it's just awful. And he's just so upset. And he's, and little Anne's injuries aren't that bad. She can make it, right? But she can't handle the passing of her friend. And so she stops eating.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think his dad says, like, she has no will to live.
She really dies of a broken heart.
Yeah.
I think one of his parents actually says to him, you need to not forget old Dan, but like kind of move on and be grateful you have little Ann. And he says, how can I forget old Dan? He gave his life for me. That's what he did. Just laid down his life for me. How can I ever forget something like that? And that gets me every time. Because, we're talking about God the whole time, and what an incredible allusion to Jesus Christ and laying down his life. How can we forget that? And yet we do.
Yeah.
We so often do, but what a great reminder. He laid down his life. How can we forget that?
Oh yeah, that's beautiful. And little Anne, doesn't she passes away like on his, like she's laying on his grave, right?
Yeah.
They go
and
find
that,
him.
oh my gosh, and that tears you up. With the last bit of her strength, she pulls herself on top of Dan's grave.
So sweet. Dogs are amazing animals, right?
They really are. Yeah.
They have, like you said earlier, they have such personality. They're amazing.
Etch themselves on your heart.
That's right. I was thinking, I mean, even just, I know this is a dumb example, but like one of our cats, like whenever Presley, who's 5 years old, is upset, our cat is like sitting outside the room looking in. Like she knows when she's upset and she comes to comfort her. It's really sweet.
Yeah. That is really sweet. So one of the questions that, well, as Billy is battling with his immense sadness and suffering and pain, he asks his mom, he says, why did they have to die? Why must I hurt so? What have I done wrong? And isn't that just sort of the universal question for people when they're suffering? Like it's sort of the classic question, why do bad things happen to good people? And so for this young boy to ask that question, it's like, that's the question on everybody's hearts when bad things happen. What have I done wrong? Why do I have to suffer? Why does it hurt so bad? And first of all, I remember, who was it that said, where there is much love, there's going to be suffering, because part of you is gone. And when you love someone, you are giving them part of you. And then when it's gone, it's like it's missing. But his mom says, "You've done no wrong, Billy." She said, "I know this seems terrible and I know how it hurts, but one time or another, everyone suffers. Even the Lord suffered while he was here on earth." And I love that answer. And I know that it's not like complete and thorough and every reason that people suffer, but it's also like everybody does.
Yeah.
Everybody does. And also doesn't necessarily try to answer it. She just says, everybody suffers, even the Lord suffered. And we just try to learn from it and become better because of it. So
Yeah, I like that she didn't try to fix it. Like she's just
yeah,
like, yeah, we
yeah,
suffer. And like I said earlier, like, oh, I don't want to get another dog because then we have to like go through losing them again, right? But we loved a dog
yes,
for
yeah,
15 years, or we hope. He's 12.
yeah,
We're hoping, right?
yeah.
Like, so it's almost like I don't want to get married and have children because I don't want to lose them, or,
Mhm.
but then
Yeah.
you missed out on years and years of joy and
Joy
someone to
and
love.
the love. Yeah, so much love because love changes you
Yep.
for the better.
And you're like, you just have to remember that everybody goes through hard things. Like
Yeah,
life wasn't meant to be easy.
exactly. Just and everyone sort of has their own breed of hard things, and we just have to learn how to deal with it and learn how to move forward, and we become better because of it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, for me, this is one of the reasons that this book is such a classic. I feel like the author has tried to address a lot of things, but this is a big one. Why do bad things happen? Why do hard things happen? Why, when you've put so much effort and time and love into something, is it taken away? And the other thing about classic books is that it doesn't necessarily answer the question, it just addresses it. And so it keeps you thinking about it afterwards. And I think that this book does that in a beautiful way.
Yeah.
So,
It brings it up like, oh, okay.
yeah,
Now I can think about that. Gives me a classic gives you something to think about and
yeah,
addresses like a moral issue, or, you know,
yeah,
I also just love that it takes you to a place that, like for us, it takes us to a place we haven't experienced, like a time and and it really puts you in that. I mean, after you've read this, you feel like you said, like you're in the Ozarks.
yeah, yeah.
Like, I
We've
feel
never
like I
actually
should go
seen them, but
hunting.
I know exactly. And I think that he does that so masterfully, and that it leads us right into the last chapter, um, because they leave the Ozarks. And that just kind of tears your heart out because he says the next spring we left. And Billy, it seems apparent that he hasn't been back up to see the graves of his dogs for a while. He probably just can't stand it. But as they're leaving, he's like, I've got to go say goodbye to my dogs. So he goes up there and he sees that there's this beautiful red fern growing, and that is miraculous by itself. Do you want to talk about the legend?
Yeah, so there's like a Cherokee legend that, and when I read too about like the Cherokee idea of land, it's like
Mhm.
burial grounds are sacred,
Yes.
right? Um, but he knows of an old Indian legend. This is what he says. I heard the old Indian legend about the red fern, how a little Indian boy and girl were lost in a blizzard and had frozen to death. In the spring, when they were found, a beautiful red fern had grown up between their bodies. The story went on to say that only an angel could plant the seeds of a red fern and that they never died. Where one grew, that spot was sacred. Yeah, it probably meant a lot to him to see that.
Yeah. And obviously it's yeah, they said only an angel could plant a red fern. So they never saw red ferns. Red ferns were just, they were a miracle. Uh, not something that you ever saw. And so, and for him, that spot was obviously very sacred.
Yeah, and like I love that he left and he can just have that memory of
Yes.
like that fern growing, and
Yeah.
he knew those dogs were so special. And that was just like proof to him.
Exactly. Yeah. It almost like a validation, like, yeah, they were extra special.
Yeah.
So, um,
I mean, in the book too, he says he never went back,
yeah.
which in
Yeah.
real life he does, but
Yeah. Okay. He talks about how their wagon moves on, they leave. And then it jumps forward back to the present day, which is 1960. And he says he's never been back to the Ozarks. But then, gosh, again, he's so good at making us feel his nostalgia at
mhm.
like, because he's like, I'd like to take a walk far back in the flinty hills and search for a souvenir, an axe buried in a tree, and the handle has probably worn away, but it's probably still there, and maybe there's an old rusty lantern hanging on it. And he says, I'd like to see the old home place, the barn and the rail fences. I'd like to pause under the beautiful red oaks where my sisters and I played. And you're just like, this is, I want to go back too, and I've never been there. But and then he closes by saying, I'm sure the red fern has grown and has completely covered the two little mounds. I know it is still there, hiding its secret beneath those long red leaves, but it wouldn't be hidden from me, for part of my life is hidden there too. And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about. When you love someone or something, you give them part of yourself. And so part of him is there. So
Yeah, he would like, I think that too. Like, if I was to go back, I would know exactly where they are. Like,
yeah.
these are,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and does he say if he ever had, I don't think he ever had dogs after that. Well, because they left. I just wonder if that was like the only time he ever owned dogs. He doesn't,
I don't know.
obviously he doesn't in 1960.
Yeah,
But
that's true. And like, I don't know how you could.
yeah. So a couple of interesting things like about the author. One is there's like a 5-part series about him on YouTube that Jim Trelease did. Like Jim Trelease wrote a book about like for children's literature, right?
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. So like if you love this book, go look that up on YouTube. What happened is he would travel and speak to schools after he published his book, and his wife recorded them. And so after he died, Jim Trelease came and they were like looking through these recordings, and there was something wrong with all of them. Like it was too much sound, background noise, or it wasn't clear. And then he got the last recording that he checked was perfect. And so
wow.
did you get to watch that series?
No, I'm gonna have to go find it.
Oh my gosh, it's so good. And so it's him talking, it's his voice talking about how trying to inspire children to write and to live their dreams. And then like, it's really cool. He tells about his family. I mean, he tells about his life and what made him write. Like he didn't have very much education.
Yeah.
And he would write on like grocery sacks, and he didn't understand grammar. And so he would, whenever his voice would pause, he'd just write a dash, and then he just keep writing. I know, it's like, it's amazing. And he didn't get married until he was like 45.
Yeah.
And right before he got married, he thought, I need to grow up and like get rid of this idea that I could be an author. And so he burnt all of his stories that he'd written. And
we were so close to not having this book, but then it was his wife that encouraged him, right?
Yeah.
She was like, no, you really need to.
Yeah, when she found out he'd done that, she's like,
ah.
So, and then he like sent her away, and he wrote it in like 3 weeks or something. Right. And then she came back and she said, this is the best book I've ever read about dogs, but it's not long enough.
Oh, so he lengthened it
Yeah.
after that. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah,
That's
she's
really
like, it's too
interesting.
long for a short story, but it's not long enough for a novel. So you need to add to it. And then she was his editor. She fixed all his punctuation and spelling. And in the documentary, you can see like they show samples of his writing, and it's like crossed out, like
Messy.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's so neat. Well, so obviously part of the truth in the story is that he didn't have a lot of education and did grow up in the Ozarks, and Wilson Rawls was part Cherokee.
Yep.
And his full name is Woodrow Wilson Rawls, right? That's what we learned.
Yeah, he went by Woody.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. He was born in 1913 in Oklahoma. I thought that was
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah.
And his mother's name was Winnie Hatfield Rawls, and Hatfield is a name in the book.
Right. Something that I thought was interesting is that Where the Red Fern Grows, it was published in 1961, but it really didn't take off for several years. So there probably was a minute where he was like, well, maybe I shouldn't have written it. But then he was invited to speak at a children's conference in Utah. And it was there that he sold tons of copies, and it just took off from there. So I thought that was
awesome. Interesting. Yeah, and it was first published in the Saturday Evening Post, like in installments.
That's right. Yeah. Okay.
Another like interesting thing about him is that he served 3 terms in prison.
That is so sorry, it's not funny, but it is kind of funny. But at the same time, it makes you realize like maybe his writing the book was sort of a redemption in a way, and showing his turning to God and being like, look, you can come back from these kinds of things and be better. But I don't know what the other 2 were for, but it seems like the first one, he served 18 months in prison for stealing somebody's chickens.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
like, so you shouldn't steal people's chickens, but it's not like the worst of the worst.
Not like, you know? Yeah. Right. And they don't have a record of why he served the other terms, but.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I mean,
so there's only a record of the chickens.
I also find it interesting that like, this isn't something that's known. It's not, that's not well known. And he never talked about it. Like,
yeah, he kind of wanted to keep it buried, probably.
Yeah. But dogs. It just shows you like that, I don't know, that he never stopped trying. Right. That he always had this dream that he wanted to write. And, you know, and it was published in 1961, right? And he died in 1984. So that hadn't been out. I mean, I guess 20 years.
Yeah.
And he saw the movie. He was alive for the movie, the first movie that was produced.
And did you seen the movie?
Yes, but I want to watch it again.
You should, because he's actually the voice of the narrator.
Yeah.
Like, and in fact, because I was listening to one of his speeches, just a part of it, and I was like, I totally recognize that voice. And then I found out later that he was the narrator in the 1974 version of the movie. I love that movie so much. I always have. And I've heard that they've made other versions. Have you seen? I didn't even realize that they made other versions until I was studying this.
Funny story. Dave Matthews, like from the Dave Matthews Band, was in one of them. I think it was in 2000 something. Okay. I wanted to watch them before we did this, but I ran out of time. Just too busy reading.
Well, I know. And I may bring myself to watch the newer ones, but I love the older ones so much. And it's wonderful. So we'll see. The jury's out.
I know. I was like, maybe I should make my kids watch it. Yeah, they're never going to watch it.
Well, shoot. maybe trick them into it or bribe them.
I don't know. I can try. Probably not. We always try to get them to watch stuff and they're like not having it. So we wanted to talk really quick about other books. So he only wrote 2 books, this one, and then The Summer of Monkeys, which is, I read that one several years ago. I loved it.
I love Summer of the Monkeys.
It's similar.
It's so fun. It is. It's kind of similar. There's like the grandpa who is the boy's biggest cheerleader. And of course there's a dog. But what I love about it is that Wilson Rawls had a dog. He only had a single dog. He didn't have 2. It was a blue tick hound named Rowdy. And in The Summer of the Monkeys, the dog's name is Rowdy. So I kind of love that. Super fun. But yeah, he wrote 2 books and they like struck gold with both of them.
Yeah, so. They're great. Although The Summer of Monkeys, I'd never heard of it until I mean, this one's definitely his most famous book, right?
Yes.
I was thinking some other, like, have you read My Side of the Mountain?
Yes.
I thought of that book.
Yeah, that's a good one. And it's a boy, it's a little more modern, but it's a boy who goes out and lives in the mountains by himself. Just because, pretty much, kind of to like see if he can, I think, and to try to learn to be more competent. So
yeah, that's My Side of the Mountain by Jean Craighead George.
Yes.
Yeah, is there one you thought of?
Yeah, one that, we talked about, maybe one that was set in the Ozarks, and one that came to mind, I read it several years ago. It's Little Farm in the Ozarks. Had you heard of that one?
I've heard of it.
So of course there's all the Little House on the Prairie books by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And then there is Little Farm in the Ozarks, not written by Laura Ingalls Wilder. And off the top of my head, I can't remember the author. I'll have to look it up. But it's about Laura and Almanzo and their daughter Rose, and they live in the Ozarks. And those are fun books too. And there's a series of like 3, but there's the one in particular that when they lived there in the Ozarks, it's about that period of time. So the other one, one that's obvious is Old Yeller, and because of dogs. But the other one that I wanted to talk about that it made me think of, just when we're talking about a young boy and being on his own and just being very competent. And it made me think of The Sign of the Beaver. Have you read that one?
You've read way more than me.
So this one is by Elizabeth George Spear, and I love all of her books. You're probably familiar with The Witch of Blackbird Pond.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so she wrote that one, but she also wrote The Sign of the Beaver. And this one takes place, I want to say, in the 18th century, and it's this young boy who he and his father go ahead of their family to like build a cabin in the wilderness, and then his father leaves him to go back and get his family. So he's just by himself in this cabin in the wilderness. And so it's him learning to survive and thrive, and he becomes friends with the Native American tribe that's there as well. And so yeah, it's a good book. I enjoy it.
Oh, I've told you this story, but I'm going to tell it again for everybody else. But I was laying in bed with my son, who's now going to be 22 in November, but he was 5 years old and he loved to be read to. And so I'm reading him this story. We're laying in bed at night and I'm just sobbing. And he looks at me and he's like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "Are we reading the same book? Like, are you here too?" No, it's just,
oh my gosh,
such a tearjerker. And like, I remember my mom reading it to us and she's just sobbing, and a book. I don't cry very often when I'm reading. Like, it has to be like, I don't know, what is it that makes you cry? I think for me it's animals, but
just when there's some sort of a connection, I think, when you can really empathize so deeply that you feel like it's affecting you.
Yeah. Oh, so good. And his writing, just like there were so many quotes in there that we could read that are just, his words are just beautiful. Another interesting thing is I've read before that people who can't write, like people that struggle with reading and writing, are often really good authors. And they think it might be because they were read to for longer in their life. And so like, once you turn a child loose on their own, then the quality of literature they're reading goes way down. But if a child that's struggling with reading on their own, their mom continues to read to them, then they get like this exposure to better literature for longer. And sometimes that
makes
can,
so much sense.
Yeah, help their skills in that way. You know, he could tell a story. He has struggled to write it down.
Could. Yeah. But, and the thing is, his style is very different from so many. It's not flowery or fancy language at all, but it's just so genuine, you know, like he still paints beautiful pictures. It's like, you feel like you're right there. He pulls you in and keeps you there, but it's also just very simple at the same time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's true.
I loved reading it. I loved it.
Yeah. Awesome. What are you reading now?
I don't remember.
I'll go because it's easy, because I don't have lots of time. So right now I'm reading our next book, but I'm also that we're going to be talking about, but to my kids, we're reading Beowulf.
Oh.
So now it's not the original version of Beowulf. I don't think any of us would be able to understand that very well, but it's a version that was written by Michael Morpurgo, who also wrote War Horse.
I've read that.
Okay. Anyway, he's a really good author. So we're reading Beowulf, and it's really good. I enjoy it. It's not one that I knew the story, but I never actually like read a book about it. But it's very well done.
Interesting. Okay, I remember now. I have to look at my list because I just finished a book. So that's why I was like, it was excellent. I read Finding Me by Viola Davis.
Oh,
it was excellent. Cool. Like, it made me want to, I cried in that book. And I don't cry in books very often. So
you keep saying that, but you keep telling me about all the times you cried. So
I know. Death. That's what makes me cry.
I guess so.
But it was excellent. It's just about her. I made me want to go watch all of her movies. Yeah, it made me like look up her list and go, oh, I want to go watch that movie. It's just about her. I love stories about people who've come from nothing.
Yeah.
And make something of themselves. And she talks about her childhood and how poor they were. Yeah. And like her dad was abusive, and he changed, and later in life he really stopped being abusive. And that's to me fascinating. That's amazing. Very like violent with her mom. And just like how I love reading about strong women that are just like, this isn't good enough for me. I'm gonna make something of myself.
Very inspiring.
So it was excellent. I would highly recommend it.